So I'm Jackson. I work at Facebook as a user interface engineer. Who here knows anything about JavaScript? If you know something, raise your hand. If you have written JavaScript, raise your hand. If you feel like JavaScript is confusing and you use it just to get shit done, raise your hand.
And you hate JavaScript.
Also an option if you hate JavaScript. If you feel like you're like pretty savvy, if you know the rules of JavaScript, if you can interact with it and get what you want out of it, raise your hand. If you consider yourself an expert at JavaScript, raise your hand. Okay, all right, got some of those, all right? So at Facebook, JavaScript is a huge point of contention, as you might imagine. It's something we fight about a lot, because JavaScript is sort of bad language in a lot of ways. It doesn't work the way we want it to. There we go. There are a lot of strange things about JavaScript that you wouldn't expect to work the way they work. And that's due largely to the way JavaScript evolved. It's kind of a, oh yeah, we should have this sort of language. And for where it started, it's got some good parts. This is Douglas Crockford, by the way. Ever know Douglas Crockford? No? Maybe? If you know Douglas Crockford, you probably have an edge up on JavaScript. And if you want to know JavaScript, you should know who this guy is. He's the chief architect for front end or for JavaScript at Yahoo. He's a bad mofo. This guy knows his stuff. He is the inventor of JSON. Anyway, he outlined sort of these good parts in a book called JavaScript, the Good Parts. So you've got prototype inheritance, that's important. You've got events, that's another huge thing that makes JavaScript a good language. And you've got stuff like object literals and array literals, and that makes JavaScript good. Then you've got some bad parts. You've got stuff like man. Of course. You've got nan does not equal nan in JavaScript, that's what I'm talking about. You've got global scope. Woo! Globals, right? Okay, maybe not. And then you've got the fact that browsers implement it, and everybody gets to implement it their own way, which turns out to be a huge, huge pain in the ass for JavaScript. Like, it's the last thing you want to have Microsoft say, we can do it our own way, right? No, you don't. Oh, stop. Anyway, plug for the book. This is JavaScript, the good parts. Read this book. If you read just the first 230 pages, your life will be so much better as a front-end person. And if you read the entire thing, you can consider yourself like savvy. If you read and understand the first name. So let's just jump right into it. One of the big sticking points of JavaScript is whether JavaScript is for data or whether JavaScript is for logic. Do you ship data down to the browser and do you diddle the data once you get it there with logic in JavaScript, or do you have JavaScript just be like an execution environment? Do you have it just sort of accept directives from the server and make the page happen? And it turns out the answer to this is sort of, it depends. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. A good example is Gmail versus like a chat application. In a chat application, you've got concurrency as an issue. You want it to be fast. You want the stuff to get down the wire and get executed, and the person to have this really synchronous, real-time experience for something that's completely asynchronous on the back end. And on the opposite of that, you've got something like Gmail, where you've got just shit tons of data that needs to get through, and you want to get the data through the line, not the logic. So you can't really spend a whole lot of time sending down directives for the client side to execute. So there's a back and forth of that. And as it says, JavaScript is single-threaded. So you can't do a whole lot with JavaScript. You have to be really efficient at what you do, period, across all of the opportunities. So the last thing I'll say about it is what we've arrived at Facebook is that the server is strong. You have lots of server power. The server is fast. The server can spit shit out quickly. The client has a lot of shit to do. The browser, it's got, you go to Facebook, you've got the chat bar, you've got your side nav, you've got your real-time stream stuff, you've got notifications coming in. Like, the browser is busy. There's advertisements on the side. What you don't want to do is slow the browser down with stuff that it doesn't necessarily have to do. And that turns out to be a good heuristic for where something belongs. Basically, wire optimize where it makes sense. So, I think I jumped in a little quick. Let me back up real quick. I'm Jackson Gabbard, I'm a user interface engineer at Facebook. I'm here because I started off in Nashville. This is where I got my foundation, a company called the Horton Group. What do you know Horton Group represent? One person? Yeah? Okay. Yeah, so I started there. I kind of cut my teeth, like breaking shit and unbreaking shit. Moved up to a company called Zoe, which is a technology startup, and then moved on to the late great Echo Music. Echo Music, anybody? All right. Woo-hoo. That's some Echo Musicers here. And from there I was like, okay, well, what's next? So I went to Facebook. It worked out for me nicely. It's a tough place to get into, but if you're interested, I say be ballsy and go for it. Don't maybe pamper around and think maybe I can't do it. Like, just do it. So anyway, I went there. I've been there a while. I learned a ton of shit. I was humbled. I was a cocky asshole when I went there, and they're like, "Hey, you're an undeserved cocky asshole. Like, back off a little bit." So I got humbled and I learned, and now I'm back. So JavaScript is what I do all day. Like, JavaScript is a big part of it. It's the bread and butter at web applications, and I'm on the core systems team. Core systems. And as a core systems engineer, like, you build complicated shit. And for me, JavaScript is how we achieve a lot of it. Like, JavaScript is like the only way to make the interactions as quick as we need them to be. Okay, so let's just get back to it. I just want to get that in there before I forgot about it. Another serious topic of JavaScript is Ajax. Ajax, right? That's a statue of Ajax, by the way. And as you can see, I've cropped it at the jonx point. You don't want too much jonx in your picture. So one thing that people talk a lot about but don't really service is the idea of graceful degradation. You want it to work when JavaScript is there. You also want it to work when JavaScript is not there. Turns out that's not so simple. By default, the way to do this is to have a fallback behavior that JavaScript intercepts and have JavaScript do something special, like an XML and HTTP request. And then if that fails, then you've still got your standard request. And to be honest, we don't do a hell of a good job of this at Facebook. I was doing some testing recently for IE, and it turned out our entire Ajax functionality for posts, for wall posts in Facebook, was broken in '97. We didn't realize it. Because our graceful degradation was there. So if we hadn't done graceful degradation, we would have been screwed. People would have been bitching. We would have had like a million trouble tickets coming in from users saying, "Hey, what's up?" But we had graceful degradation. So even though it was broken, it worked. So if you're going to Ajaxify your jonx, make sure the shit works right whenever the Ajax does not work. Who here knows what a pagelet is? Maybe? No? So pagelet. When you go to Facebook.com, if you watch like a packet logger, you will see that a ton of shit happens. There's like a gazillion requests. We do a thing called pagelets for everything that's a chunk of the page. We do a pagelet for the ads, we do a pagelet for the navigation, we do a pagelet for the string in the middle of the page, which basically means we bottle up the content into a single request. So when you hit Facebook, you actually get returned like 6 or 7 different responses, because the initial load triggers a bunch of async loads of other stuff. So one key thing that we found that really, really works for Ajaxifying your page with JavaScript is to do pagelets, to break up the page into the pieces that make the most sense. It speeds everything up. Of course, the issue with this, though, is that browsers only implement 2 continuous requests. You can only request from the same domain 2 times. The fix for this, of course, is to use subdomains. So if you have multiple subdomains, you can request infinitely. And at Facebook, we have solved this in a way I can't talk about too much because it's proprietary, but we've solved this by having infinite subdomains, essentially, so that we can have as many pagelets as we ever need. So the reason this works, of course, the reason we want to Ajaxify things is because it saves bandwidth, because you don't have to load everything, you have to load only what you need, which is it's pretty kick-ass, it turns out, because you don't need the Chrome of the page, you don't need the navigation, like the stuff that doesn't change, you don't have to change, and you can change stuff that needs to be changed only. Of course, one of the liabilities that we run into, and I'm sure everyone here has experienced it, where you hit the back button on Facebook and it takes you back to not where you thought you were going to be. Anybody? Yeah? We're not perfect. It's a complicated problem to solve, but the cheap question you should be asking yourself is, am I breaking the browser? Like, does the browser work the way it's supposed to? If someone hits the back button, does the back button work? Turns out it's not trivial. So if you're thinking about it with JavaScript, make sure you you devote some time and energy to that issue first. Oh, I should have said also, if you have any questions at any point, just chime in. Like, I'm much more into interruption than continuous speech. I know I'm entertaining, but if you want to stop me and ask a question, just go for it. About it? Mm-hmm. Oh. Hands up if you need it. Events, right? JavaScript events, it's a base language. Anybody Monty Python fans in here? Okay. So, one thing you will see, especially if you're like a jQuery fan, if you're a fan of abstractions to JavaScript, you will find you use lots and lots of events and you kind of disregard them. It's like, oh, I set up an event handler, I'm done, whatever. Well, it turns out if you profile a page, events are not free. There's memory overhead associated with events. If you've got a list of 300 items and you associate an event with each one of those, if you're in the context of a much more complicated page, like you're paying a bill for that in performance. So the idea is whenever you have a ton of identical or similar events, you group them into a parent event handler. And that parent event will delegate, will say, okay, I've got an event. What target am I actually from? Like, what thing was actually clicked? And you use logic to dig in, find where the event was triggered, and then come back out, as opposed to having each little inline item have an event associated with it, which turns out is a huge win. And if you use Gmail by Android, if you go to the full site view of Gmail, you can see that when you click on any item in the list, the whole block of messages highlights. It's because they're doing that. They're saying, okay, you're clicking the entire message list. What particular message are you clicking? Find that one event, then do the magic from there. Don't assign an event lister to every single message, because as it turns out, whenever you have Ajax loading and dumping of the page, you lose those events. And you don't want to set them back up again. That's a pain in the ass. Like, that's a huge pain in the ass. We tried that. That shit doesn't work. So global event listeners, figure out what you're targeting, and then base your next action off of the actual target of the event. Totally win. Ooh, XSS. The evil thing that happens with JavaScript and HTML and input and all of those things that unite, and you get owned by some asshole in Argentina. That happens, right? It's always some like 13-year-old kid who's like, oh, I just copied and pasted this thing from Scriptaculous and now it works. So the solution to this is escape. Not the escape key, like escape your content. 5 escapings is as good as 1 escaping. Okay, that's not true. 1 escaping is all you need. Just make sure it's done. We've learned this again and again and again at Facebook, that if you trust the HTML someone gives you, you get screwed eventually. Somebody figures it out, and they just own your ass. One thing we figured out, we got a guy who's kind of you hear about like the nerds who are chained to a desk, they're locked in the basement, it's dark, and all they do is like produce wicked code all day. This guy's like an escapee from one of those refugee camps. It's like he made it out. And he figured out that if you just completely scrape all the HTML, reparse it, and build your own HTML nodes out of it, you can just completely eliminate invalid nodes. If you take a input HTML and say, p tag is okay, br tag is fine, div is okay, whoa, script tag, no sir. You cut it out, you can rebuild the HTML minus all the stuff you don't want. And it just works. Like, hey, there you go. It's a valid HTML that doesn't contain anything that you don't want. Totally win. What's that? It probably does. WordPress does some magic for you. So the other thing is, with XSS, don't trust external sources. Don't say, paste your remote image URL here, serve the page. Like, you're going to get owned. It's going to happen. Even with CSS, like import inside of CSS, that's just dangerous too, it turns out. So the rule is, never serve anything from a domain other than you, unless that's from Facebook. Then it's okay, because we protect our shit. No, seriously, our stuff is really, really secure, so I wouldn't sweat that. But, like Facebook.cz, like, don't serve that. Okay, so jQuery. Who uses jQuery? Oh yeah, you should. jQuery's badass. John Resig is a badass. He interviewed Facebook, this guy, only John Resig was interviewing us. It's like, are you guys good enough for me? Maybe not. Anyway, so jQuery hides some stuff from you though. Like, you use $, you put some shit in there, and it returns some stuff, and you use it. What you don't realize is that so often you're traversing the DOM like over and over and over again. And you wind up in this place where you're just working the page to death to get like a single link and apply a class to it. So, I'm not going to get into the gory details unless we want to. You guys just let me know how technical you want to get. We'll go as far as you want to go. Basically, you pick an appropriate parent. You use ID selection, like dom.getElement by ID, or sorry, document.getElement by ID lets you get an appropriate parent for a node, and then you can traverse locally. Like, try to traverse as minimally as possible. And that way you don't waste time going through nodes you'll never use for anything, because that shit's expensive. Hello event listeners, as we discussed already, jQuery, you can just assign and click them into 500 elements with a single function call. That's terrifying, right? Like, that's dangerous. Because you might create a page and in testing you've got 3 events, works fine, whatever. Then you've got 500 lines on the actual production page, someone loads IE6, and the browser freezes up. That's not good, you don't want that. So the idea is, just like we talked about before, don't attach event listers for everything. That's dangerous. That's a good way to have your page be slow and terrible. One thing Facebook does, jQuery does for you that's kick-ass is it corrects browser inconsistencies. Who here has ever written their own event handlers for JavaScript? So like you got target, you got source element, you got all of these slight variations on what the actual target of an event was. And that sucks, because you don't have to like select which event it was, which property of the event object you need based on the browser you're in. So jQuery fixes that, and that's kick-ass. That's how it should be. Go jQuery.